30 like me will remember from our youth Triumph Dolomites, Capris, Escorts, the whole works. This, the immaculately prepared Sam Cooke Ford Capri Mark I, running in the post-historic Touring Car Champions. Look at that, Batmobile. Other cars here at the circuit today, Tuscans. And the cars preparing to go out in the post-historic race. Looks a bit like a Capri Fest, I have to say. Well, some cars you might recognise from tracking you down on the highways. The oft-used police SD1 there, and other cars running in today's meeting, such as the Sports Saloon Championships, the Ace Vehicles Delivery Championships. Most of these cars are prepared by their owners, lovingly prepared, I have to say. This, the Dutch entry, which is the BMW 2002 Ti, a very rare car these days. Everything going through scrutineering. Immaculate standards of preparation on many of these cars. The name on the cylinder head says it all. And the MG Championship running alongside them today. Huge number of MG Maestros and Montegos. Very cheap to buy, very cheap to run. And this is the sort of racing you could get into if you fancy a bit of nostalgia. Not too much expense. Of course, as always, it depends on how big your purse is as to how competitive your car can be. But by and large, the cars are run to the rules and regulations they would have been when the cars were produced in the first place. Just catching sight here of a Mark III Cortina. In fact, the only one there. Terrific to see it out. And these really are proper race cars, as you can see as they get inside. All stripped out, ready to go, race seats, full harnesses, the works. Terrific day's action in store, and an enormous crowd, I have to say, lining up to watch this, the post-historic touring car race. Dolomites, a great favourite. That's the XJ12 of Brian Stevens, the only one in its class, I have to say. Was on handicap. It ran in this class. Mini 1275 GT Mark I Escorts, and the last car you saw there was a Toyota. Nice to see it out. Triumph Dolomite whizzing straight out in front. Nigel Garrett in the Dolomite Sprint. There's that XJ12 of Brian Stevens, and an NSU engine in the rear, of course, not to be confused with the Renault 8 R8 Gordini, which it looks rather like, I have to say. See what I mean about Capri Fest? Enormous amount of them. And look at this. Wonderful to see the Mini Cooper up against some bigger machinery. Amount of negative camber on those front wheels to keep it on the track. But of course, it's no good if it doesn't go. That is Simon Dawson's Mini Cooper expiring in the pit lane. These cars making a wonderful evocative sound of the 70s and early 80s. Appeals to everybody. Everybody appreciated it. And as organiser Peter Mallet explains, anybody can get involved.
Peter, presumably this is the sort of racing people come and see because 10 or 15 years ago they were out there doing it themselves.
Yeah, and you can also identify with the cars. I mean, if you take some of the other formulae like the single-seaters and so on, it's very difficult for the average punter, shall we say, to understand what's going on. You know, slipstreaming and so on is a nice technical term, but if you don't see actual overtaking, then really it loses its point.
Presumably half the battle is having a shape out on the track that people can recognise. They can look at it and say, oh look, Mark I Escort, I had one of those.
That's right, the shopping car Grand Prix.
Now, how fast has the series grown over the last few years?
Well, in 1974 I think it started with about maybe a dozen competitors, which was then just the classic Saloon Car Championship. A bit later on it developed, but during that time I think they expanded to what we have now, which is really full grids for the later championships, because the cars are much more available. So you'd have had a dozen, say, to start with. Then you would move on to the historic touring cars. And again, start off with a dozen, expand to full grids, and as you can see today we've got, I think there were 20 in that championship today. Then it moved on again to bring in the pre-74 post-historics. And again, it started with about a dozen cars. Now it's full grids, 26 cars here, 28 is the maximum that you can get on this grid.
So with all the classes that are turning up at each meeting, how many cars are you having turn up in total?
The average the average entry for a meeting is between 75 and 80 cars. I think here we've got about 90, but I guess that's the weather.
Now, if you're like Peter Mallory, you're lucky enough to have bought your first car for 50 quid and then built it up from there. But some people have actually found cars they've had in the past. Come over here. This car here, number 27 Capri, belongs to a young chap called Graham Scarborough. Graham.
Hi, hello there.
Nice to see you. How are you?
Yeah,
right?
fine, thanks. Yeah, very well. Very well. Nice to see you.
Now, I understand that this car has a sort of long history with you.
Well, it has got a bit of a history, I have to say, because this was a 1981 production saloon car that was built by Jerry Marshall Racing for Jerry and I to race in the 81 24-hour race at Snetterton, together with Derek Shortall from Ireland and David DaCosta. And we actually came second in that car in that year. And unfortunately, in the middle of the night, it got rolled. But we still managed to finish second. So I was actually the first person to drive the car when it was built new for racing, although it actually wasn't mine. So, but now it is, so it's great.
So there you go, if you get involved in the post-historics, you can race against a proper racing driver. This is the post-historics, lining up, just look at that. I remember these. In fact, one of the first books my father ever bought me on motor racing had nearly all of these cars in it. Jaguar XJ12 versus Mazda RX-3 on the front there, and away they go. And just look at the superior torque of that Jaguar. Brian Stevens pulling away from just about everybody. Poor old NSU down the back. Of course, these cars became very, very famous in the hands of Tom Walkinshaw and the TWR team. With fantastic noise as they stream past the pits. Escorts and Capris abounding. There's a spattering of other cars in there, Triumph Dolomites and the NSU. Remarkably, there are 3 at the event. Big crowd turning out today, the weather obviously helping. And the Mark II Jags running alongside the post-historics, providing a little bit of entertainment for everybody. In fact, there were 5 Escort Mark 1s in this race, 6 Capris, and the Mark II Jag also running in this class. This is the Group A race. I was talking to Graham Scarborough earlier. And a lot of these cars you'll recognise from in your driveway only about 10-15 years ago. There is the aforementioned Mr. Scarborough screaming for his second place there, I noticed. Amazing to think that about 15 years ago you've been paying 50 or 100 quid for these cars. In fact, you can still pick some of them up for about the same price. They're MOT failures, as Peter Mallet ably demonstrated. Join us later on in the show. We'll be coming back to Mallory Park, talking to a few more people, seeing a few more cars, and just generally wallowing in 1970s and early 80s nostalgia. This is also better than working for a living. Back at Mallory Park, this is the sound, so they say, of classic thunder. Rover SD1 setting the early pace, and look at that, that's the Batmobile, a 3-litre CSL BMW. That's an ex-works cast on the Nürburg 1000K and various other races. That's a Vauxhall Forenza, haven't seen one of those for ages. Opel Ascona. Some of these guys really know how to drive, and the diminutive NSU, rather cute really. Nice to see a Saab in this lineup. Saab 99, we don't see many of those, but you can see the leading car has almost caught the back markers already. Look how much smoke is coming off that car as he tries to brake and turn in and avoid being taken at the same time. Lotus Cortina of Tranton there. Quite mixed bag in this class. Anything from the Lotus Cortina to the Dolomite again, as we can see. Mark 1 Escorts, and this is an absolutely glorious sight. Getting past the SD1 and in fact taking the honours in that race. And if anybody's listening now and wants to give me one for my birthday, are quite happily accepted. Everybody came, of course, not only to see those cars, but to see some of these as well. These are the pre-63s, wonderful array of cars. There's the poor old Dawson expired Mini being cooled down. A lot of Morris Minors this year. Highly competitive car, people tend to forget that they were raced with great success. And Jaguars always a stalwart. But because it's a handicapping system in this class, we caught up with this year's current champion. He's a Morris Minor driver, Reg Solway of Bristol.
For some of the younger viewers of this particular section of the programme, they might not associate the Morris Minor with racing, but of course it's got a pretty good history of racing, hasn't it?
I think it has. The car I've got has been racing for more than 50% of its life. If my maths is correct, someone I'm sure will correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a 1957 two-door Morris Minor, and it was part of, or taken into the Classic Saloon Car Championship in 1975, when the Classic Saloon Car Club first started off.
So this is one of the oldest cars actually out here racing, I mean, within the club itself.
Yes, it is. There's quite a few people in the club who will say they've owned it or driven it at some stage, and most people can remember seeing it back in the 70s and early 80s, and it's had many drivers. And you know, people have come along and said it's nice to see that car winning a championship. And for me, last year was my first year of racing. I obviously bought a good car, which was very forgiving. You know, you could buy a car which was hard work and would have made my first season difficult. But a nice, easygoing car behaved itself and forgiven me one or two mistakes, and I ended up winning the Classic Saloon Championship with it.
Well, I mean, obviously, doing minors for a living as well as a hobby. Do you ever sit there and think, wouldn't mind stepping up to something really big and hairy like a Mustang or something like that?
No. Is that short enough an answer for you?
Well, yep, that was a short enough answer for me, Reg. Now, if you don't fancy some of the classics, or don't want to build up a Thunder Saloon once or another, what about the MGs? There are plenty of these Maestros and Montegos in MG form knocking around. Possibly under 1,000 will pick you one up, and it won't take you much more to get it ready to race. And extremely competitive and very close stuff it is too. This really is stuff for the whole family, and it's never too young to start motor racing, that's what I say.